I would like to introduce Pam Buffington here at EDC. She's the facilitator for the Northeast Rural Districts Research Alliance, and she's our moderator this afternoon. So welcome, Pam.
Thank you, Peter. Welcome, everyone. As Peter said, this is the Students and Families Living in Rural Poverty Research and Strategies for Educator webinar. I will give you a brief overview of the agenda, and then I will provide a little bit of background, and then I will turn it over to our featured presenter, Dr. Tom Hirschl. After each of the sections of this agenda, we'll have an opportunity for question and answer. As was pointed out in the warm-up area, you can add questions as we're going along, and we will hand those over to our presenters at any point in time, but we'll also have an opportunity where we stop and spend time with Q&A. So after Dr. Hirschl, we'll have a response scheduled for Heather Perry. She's the superintendent in Maine RSU 3. She actually has had an emergency in her district, so I will be covering for her, but you will get her strategies even if she's not here. She will be followed by Dr. Lynn McCann, another superintendent in upstate rural New York. That will be followed by Principal Rhonda Poliquin from New Suncook School in Lovell, Maine. And then we'll have some discussant time at the end, and then we'll wrap up and ask you to complete a feedback survey. To give you a sense of the goals for today's webinar, the goals are to increase understanding of diversity of rural communities and the attitudes towards poverty, as well as the material conditions of poverty. Provide strategies to work and to support students and families living in poverty, to minimize stigmatization and maximize inclusiveness. Engage stakeholders in dialogue about strategies that rural schools and districts are currently using to support their families and students. To use the interactivity of the webinar forum to effectively discuss these issues. So as you're listening, we suggest you take some notes and jot down some ideas, and certainly ask questions in the chat. In what ways does this research connect to your work? What are the topics I want to learn more about? What are the ideas I want to share with my colleagues? And as I said previously, what are questions you want to ask the presenters? As you can see from this slide, if you look in the lower left-hand corner, you can actually type in the chat there, and we will continue to pose those to the speakers. This webinar is being hosted by the Northeast Rural Districts Research Alliance. I am the facilitator of the group, and Angela is the researcher, as Peter introduced earlier. Our goal is to provide research to support rural schools and districts' efforts to ensure student success, to understand their local capacity, and to support efforts to build capacity to understand data specific to related programs and initiatives. As you can see from this slide, our core planning group membership is across the region, pretty much what we call the northern tier, Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont, and upstate New York and the rural parts of New York. Our group came together in 2012 and engaged around priority issues for rural schools and established a research agenda. There were many areas that surfaced, but they basically boil down to two different areas. We want to study the structures to support efficiencies, effectiveness, and equity, and to really look at school-community relationships that are so key to small rural schools. Currently, we have two studies in progress that should be being published very soon. Online course use in rural and non-rural high schools, results from a survey in the greater capital region of New York. We also will be publishing Gearing Up to Teach Math Common Core, What are the educator needs and online resources in rural Northeast? you can be looking for that information to be coming to you in your email and be promoted by the REL. So just to give a baseline for our conversation today, it's important to know that more than 13 million children and adolescents attend school in rural communities and isolated towns. Of these, over 9 million go to schools in rural communities with fewer than 2,500 students. America's rural children number more than 4 times as many students as New York City, Los Angeles, Chicago, Houston, Philadelphia, Detroit, Baltimore City, Washington, D.C., Atlanta, Boston, Pittsburgh, Minneapolis, and Indianapolis combined. Sometimes you'll hear a lot about big initiatives happening in urban centers. In those urban centers, if you take all of those students in the named cities and put those all together, that would still be less than the number of rural students that we serve. What type of community do you work in? Here's an opportunity for you to give us a sense of where you're doing your work. So if you could just take a minute and complete this poll, it'll give us a sense of where you're at. And as you're completing this, you'll notice that there is a category called rural and one called rural remote. For those of us who live in rural remote areas, there's no question what that is. In the northern tier states here, there was just a big article in the New York Times about the consideration for reorganization and or consolidation in Vermont. There are a number of very small schools in Vermont that are separated by mountains, and so many of them are in that rural remote category. I can see here that we have currently 57% of folks in rural and 11.4% in rural remote. About 15% are from urban. That's very interesting given the commonalities of serving students and families living in poverty. A lot of the strategies we will get to will apply in that setting as well. This is excellent. I'm going to move on back to the slide deck, but continue to complete the poll because those numbers will be added up and we can look at these later in the presentation or after to help serve your needs. Just to get a little bit more context, children under the age of 6 in rural America are more likely to live in poverty than children in suburban or central city communities. A brief from the University of New Hampshire's Carsley Institute reports that 1 in 5 young rural white children, 2 in 5 Hispanic, 1 in 2 young rural African American children all live in poverty. It's quite amazing when you start to look at the figures. And in fact, over the course of time, rural poverty is both increasing and becoming more geographically widespread. So as we think about this topic today, this gives you a sense of the landscape or the foundation of the work. I'm now going to introduce our featured presenter, Dr. Tom Hirschl. He's a professor of development psychology and the director of Cornell University's Population and Development Program. He received his PhD from the University of Wisconsin-Madison in 1986 and was appointed to the Cornell faculty in the same year. His research interests are in the areas of social stratification, demography, poverty, social policy, and the role of technology in triggering social change. He's published papers analyzed poverty and affluence over the American life course, rural and urban differences in poverty determinants, the effect of marriage and family status on likelihood of affluence, the conflict between farming and suburbanization, and the effect of Social Security transfers on rural development. Welcome, Dr. Hirschl.
Thanks, Pam. It's really great to be here. I think this is a really exciting event that we have, and I just finished working on a book that's looking at how Americans experience their life course and how they think about that. And I think, so that book is kind of really focused me on kind of the United States as a national community. But also as part of my job responsibilities at Cornell, I'm part of cooperative extension, and I get out to communities, many different kinds of communities in New York State, in particular rural communities. And I know that although we have a lot of diversity in the country, and that the kind of place where people live really matters in terms of how their thinking evolves over time and shape their experiences. So I think this is a really important event that we look at, children in poverty, how we can facilitate greater equity in our schools, but also how community influences that process. So the title of my presentation, Students and Families Living in Poverty, and so how do we understand this? What can we do about it? The first bullet I have is, so I've sort of divided my talk into three parts. The first one is the American dream in the context of economic inequality. I just mentioned this book that I've worked, it's called Chasing the Dream. And one of our ideas is that we were looking especially at the thinking of the American people, and we do see this some common threads, which we can sort of loosely call the American dream. And this really is at odds with other people that have looked at the question of poverty. For example, Ruby Payne in her book on helping children in poverty. Our idea is that there really is not a cultural divide between people in poverty and people that are not in poverty, that we do live in a common community where people who are in poverty tend to want the same things that people that are not in poverty. So this is, maybe a different approach than the one that she has developed. Then I talk about navigating, rural places are not, there really isn't one kind of place that's rural. There are many different kinds of rural places, and I have some maps of the country that kind of indicate that and some discussion about that. And finally, this final one is really important, and we have a poll to help us discuss it completely, and so we really understand it at the end. Making contact with students in poverty requires this idea of navigating symbolic boundaries. If you think of inequality as like some kind of difference, a difference in income, a difference in wealth, people are very aware of these differences, these material differences, and people navigate them according to their own situation and how they see other people. And there are things called symbolic boundaries, which are really, really important to be aware of when you're in situations where you're dealing with families and children in poverty. So that's, I think, kind of where the rubber meets the road is on number 3. Okay, so I just want to sort of start off with some basic definitions. First of all, what is the American dream? Well, I mean, every person has their own dream, right? It's not like, there's only one, we're kind of all just controlled by one person behind the curtain, like in The Wizard of Oz. No, people have very different lives. When you look at someone, you may see their gender or their race or something about them. You really can't read people off by their outward appearance, because everybody has, they're born in a certain place, they have experiences that are very unique. So I don't want to say that we're kind of, putting everybody into the same mold. However, we do have a country that's been evolving for 200 plus years. We do have certain experiences that all of us have gone through across the generations. And there is something that I think is real, and it's not even specific to the United States. It's actually kind of a global phenomenon, something we can call the American dream. And what that really comes down to in the most general sense is this second bullet, which really is it's about middle class expectations. And the way that when I finished this book, I worked with my best friend from graduate school is Mark Rank, and then Kirk Foster is someone that helped us with the interviews, he's also a co-author on the book. This is something that's kind of like in sports, that the idea is that, when you're on a team, the idea is that you do your job, you do your assignment on the team, whether you're the catcher on the team or the pitcher or the first baseman. You do your job, and then you expect, if everybody else does their job, you're going to win the game, or at least you have a good shot at winning the game, and you're going to win more games than you lose, or that kind of thing. That if you just sort of play by the rules, you try hard, you stay focused, you're going to get what you're trying to get. And that's kind of the something that has evolved over time. That kind of thinking has evolved in the context of a middle-class society where the majority of the people are not super rich, and they're not really that poor. They're in the middle. Of course, there are gradations within the middle class, or as you could say, there's an upper middle class, a lower middle class, or lower, whatever you want to say. But there is this idea that if I just kind of cooperate with my teammates, things are going to go well. So that's sort of the general idea. But specifically, Mark and Kirk and I looked at lots of survey data. We did our own survey work. We did focus groups. We did a lot of in-depth interviewing with people. We tried to really say specifically, what does this mean in a general sense? And then we used some statistics to kind of really define this really carefully. And there really are three components to this. And I think these three components, I really think they are valid for the country right now. And maybe they'll change. I think actually they are changing, and we could talk about that later. But for the country right now, there are these three things that are really specific. The first one is, it's the idea that I should have freedom to choose what I want to do with my life. And I should, I have to follow one's passion. I mean, that's one way of saying it. We have people, one of the people we interviewed in our book was someone who was a baseball catcher who started playing baseball. He got a big bonus, and he got a lot of money at first, and then his career went straight down. He didn't hit at the right time. He got injured. And so he's still playing baseball every day, and he's not making any money, and his wife is supporting him. And he says, I'm living the dream, right? He's not successful in a traditional sense, but he's successful in the sense that he's doing what he wants to do. So that kind of thing, that people really feel like that's important. Secondly, people want to feel like they can work hard, and in exchange for that hard work, they'll get economic security. Now, what's happening in the country right now, for all kinds of reasons, that's not, and some of the statistics that Pam talked about before I came on, that's not happening all the time, right? People are having hard times, and this is a real problem, right? I think, and I don't want to say that this is an explanation for the violence that we see happening, some of it happening in schools, some of it in, crazy stuff in movie theaters, every place. But I think people are really not happy with their lives, and especially young people. They see their prospects not going well. So the second one is a very basic one, and it's kind of the foundation for the first one. And this third one, I think, is really important for working with children and with families in a school context, which is that Americans want to feel optimistic about the future. And one of the ways this is expressed is they say, well, I want my children to have a better life than the one I had. I want rising expectations. And so feeling optimism, but in particular in terms of the lives of the people that we're close to. So these three things, I think, are really the very specific components. It's not that people want to become millionaires. That's not, or they want to get rich. That's relatively low down on the scales when people scale those things. It's really these three things, and it's really more about security. So then we ask, then in the book we ask this question, well, how much security is there? Well, it turns out that there really isn't security. I mean, there's sort of like the tides, right? It comes and goes. I mean, people get rich and they get poor, and sometimes it happens to the same people in their life course. And what we do we have some very good data where we follow people for 41 years, and we follow them from age 25 to 60. We look at what happens, and this is a very unusual data set. It's at the University of Michigan. It's called the Panel Study of Income Dynamics. We find that almost 79% of people have one or more year of economic vulnerability, and we define vulnerability as the head of the household becomes unemployed, the family experiences an income level that's equal to poverty or near poverty, or 3, the family uses a social safety net. People don't want to use a social safety net, and when they do, that's an indication of problems. So in fact, the majority of us have at least one bad year. On the other hand, we could say we looked at how many people hit this kind of 6th level, in terms of $2,009, $100,000 a year. Well, actually, most, 3/4 of the population hit that 6-figure income at some time during their working years. So, in other words, a lot of people get both. Most people get one or the other. Very few people get neither. So this kind of thing that people are living in these sort of tidal waters where they hit the highs and they hit the lows. And so people then have to deal with the highs. We tend to talk more about the highs and less about the lows in our public presentations of ourselves, but in fact, people are hitting both. Okay, now this is just to give you a more concrete sense of how many lows, and actually this is the years of experiencing a spell of welfare. And so we see that about 45% between the ages of 25, these are cumulative percents of people that hit at least one or more years. It's at 45%. It's 32% for 2 or more years. 25. So you can see that, and if you go to 10 or more years, only 7% are on welfare for 10 or more years. So actually, people tend to hit these things once. They don't necessarily hit it a lot. But this is, again, to give you a sense, this is how we looked at people's like total experience of these kinds of adverse events. Okay, so again, this is more of a very detailed empirical look at this process. And some of these numbers are in the appendix of our book, too. A lot more numbers are there if you want to look at some more of this stuff. Okay, now this is something that I think this next slide is really important. It's a paper that I've been thinking about a lot by Robert Moffat, who's an economist at I think he's at Johns Hopkins now. He used to be at Brown University. But he's looking at this thing that's happening, which is very, very important for security. Most people's security depends on their ability to get into the labor market and earn a living. Very few people have savings or any kind of security, any kind of financial ability to get income from other methods. And what we see happening, and this graph, I think, this is a paper that's in the Brookings Institution commissioned this paper, which is a think tank in Washington, D.C. What we see happening are some really important trends in our culture around people's ability to get into the labor market. And I have a way of looking at that, and I'm going to describe these trends. And they're different for women than for men. They're different by gender. And there's kind of three broad periods in these trends. The first one is from 1970 to the year 2000, when we see an overall trend in the percent of the population going into the labor market is increasing. It's increasing from about 64% up to about 73%. But within that, there's two very different components of that trend. First of all, it's actually increasing faster for women. Now, what this is saying is that more and more women are pursuing their economic career not as a homemaker, but as someone who's going into the labor market. And this includes women with children, women with not children, unmarried women, all kinds of women more and more women are going to work across this period of time. However, it's actually the opposite for men. The labor market participation rate is actually declining for men, and most of these men are men that are high school dropouts. They're men with very few skills. And some of these men have been incarcerated, and when they come out of jail, it's almost impossible for them to get a job because of the competition for jobs. So this is a very, very, very starkly different gender picture. And one of the things that's been happening at universities is that the application pools at universities has been disproportionately female, because women are kind of coming more and more into the system, and men are kind of being marginalized by the labor market, which in my opinion is starting to flatten out and decline because of this increasing technology. The increasing technology is being used in employment that's making labor less important, and so labor is not being hired as much to do work. But then we see the second period between 2000 and 2007 when the overall percent starts to go down, and here men and women are more in parallel or more in sync, and we see this decline. And then the third period, when the Great Recession hits, we see this huge drop-off and not much of a recovery since the recession ended. So we're seeing, and this is a signal of distress for the country as a whole, because I think men want to get into the labor market just as much as women, but men are being less successful, and wages were rising for women across this period, and they're actually not rising, they're flat for men. So we see this problem that I think the fact that more boys are not advancing to the next grade. There's failures in the school system, but I think maybe it's related to this phenomenon in the labor market. I just want to throw that out there for people to think about, because I think this is, again, a real signal of distress for the population, because this ability to get a job is really fundamental to our system. Okay. I guess we're going to pause for questions. Does anybody? How do we do this?
I'll actually ask you a few questions that have been posed in the chat, and one of those relate to your second point about hard work not equating to economic security. There have been some questions about could you explain the difference as you're thinking about this in terms of situational poverty versus generational poverty, and then another question just to kind of put it in context. When you were talking about the income people moving in and out of different income levels on slide 18, were you talking about individual income or combined household income at that $100,000 value?
That's total family income.
Okay, good.
So that's not earnings. That's that's income from all sources.
Okay.
Okay, so you're asking me about people moving in and out of poverty as situational versus generational?
Yes.
Which I think would be this slide probably. 79% of Americans will experience one or more years. Well, it turns out that generational poverty is by far the smallest component of poverty. It's less than 10% of the total poverty that are people that are actually in long-term poverty, and people that are intergenerationally poor is even a smaller component. So that is a component of poverty, but the vast majority is transitional or acute poverty that's short time, or economic distress tends to last 1 or 2 years and then it's gone. Although then once you have it once, it's likely to happen again. Is there the other question about is people not getting security?
Yeah.
What was the other question?
The other question is around what we're seeing in folks having multiple jobs, working because of the way that the labor market is currently, that they're continuing to do hard work, and in fact, in many cases, doing multiple jobs. And that relates, we think, to your point of hard work does not equate to economic security, the fact that, so
right.
Just to speak to that.
Yes, I think that what we're seeing is that the number of jobs that are high paying are getting fewer and fewer, so that over the last 30 years or so, all of the increases in family income have gone to the top 10% of earners. And so the bottom 90% have been stagnant or even declining in terms of their earnings power. And what this means is that people, exactly what you're saying, they're having to work a lot of jobs. One of the people we interviewed for our work is someone who used to work in an automobile assembly plant, and he was making more than a good six-figure income and supporting I think he had 3 children. One day, it wasn't that he lost his job, it was that his place of work was terminated by the corporation he was working for, and it was gone. And he felt at that point, or he came home from work that day, and he felt terrible because he felt like he couldn't pay for the groceries anymore. He had been dispossessed of his ability to support his family. And so what he's doing now, as a result of that, he started a roofing business and a photography business. And his conclusion is that he's working more hours, but he's making far less money. And he doesn't see a way to kind of boost his income up. So that kind of situation, I think, where people have been dispossessed of these high-wage jobs, this is very, very common for a big chunk of our society.
Great. I think at this point we can move on to the next section. Thanks.
Okay. Okay, this question of rural diversity, I think, is really important, and I want to try to get the geography of this. And part of this is race and ethnicity. Okay, so first of all, this is a map. This slide 23 is a map of the United States, and it shows those dark blue areas are areas that are areas where their county has poverty 20% or more across multiple decennial, across when the government takes a census. It continues to be poor over time because that's really the only time they measure poverty at the county level. I mean, well, actually they're doing it now with the American Community Survey, but across the last 40 years, these are the poor places. And so I want to talk about some of these clusters because I think they tell us about how rural areas are different. And I'm going to go to another slide, which is going to look at how this looks when really cross-classified with race and ethnicity. But this is the first slide. The first cluster is in East Tennessee and Kentucky, and this is Central Appalachia. This is largely white poverty. It's an area of the country that industrialized with coal mines around 1900 as a result of the infusion of capital, mostly from England, from some coal producers who kind of wanted to get away from the very high rates of unionization in Britain. And they started taking coal out of the ground, and the wages started low, and then they actually came up during the 30s and 40s when the CIO was organizing. But then they started strip mining, and the places have been poor. I mean, right after World War II, new technology came in, and most of the miners lost their jobs. So these places have been poor for this is multi-generational. Now the second area is this kind of arc in sort of the lowlands of the South. It starts in the Carolinas and Virginias, and then goes through the coastal areas or the near coastal areas of Alabama, Mississippi, and then kind of spreads out in Louisiana, Mississippi, and East Texas. This is the historic plantation belt where cotton cultivation occurred in the antebellum South. This is African American poverty, which has been persistently poor since its origin in slave production. So again, this is another area of the country that's persistently poor, that's rural, that's very different from Appalachia in terms of the ethnic composition, but in terms of the poverty rates are very similar. Now if we go further west, we see some areas in Texas that are along the Texas-Mexico border. These are areas of high Hispanic, rural counties with high Hispanic concentration. And this is related to the kind of the civil rights questions that never got resolved when Texas was founded, that the the Hispanic population living there stayed poor after the establishment of Texas. And then further, if we go further to the west, Albuquerque is a poor town, which is kind of central New Mexico. Just west of Albuquerque, there's this big area that kind of spreads out along the Arizona border. That's the Navajo Reservation. And if we look north in the Dakotas, we see other dark blue areas. Those are other Indian reservations. Indian reservations are very impoverished. They have high rates of poverty in the populations living there. So, and the same thing in Alaska. There's a big stripe down the middle of Alaska that's basically an Indian reservation. So again, you see this kind of this mosaic of rural communities that have persistent poverty. Most of them are in the South, but there also are other places too. There's these little pockets of poverty that have been there for generations. Now this next, I want to talk about this next, as I think this is really important. This is something from our book, is a GIS study, where we wanted to look at the intersection of race and class, which is a very important intersection to think about. The earlier slide where I was talking about Indian reservations, the plantation South, and Appalachia, this kind of tells us something about the history of the country, which is largely a middle-class country, but there is also this history of race and ethnic inequality that kind of blends into the social class structure. And so we wanted to look at, to what extent is that really affecting kids today? To what extent is there an intersection of race and class today? And we have three maps here for the three major ethnic groups in the country: whites, blacks, and Hispanics. And on the maps, where you see the map gray, that means that there are children living in that gray area that are not in high poverty counties. And the way that we defined a high poverty county, we broke the county down according to neighborhoods, which are, according to the Census Bureau, tries to replicate it, or tries to present a neighborhood as something called a census tract. And we said that if 40% or more of the children in that census tract or in that neighborhood are in families below the poverty level, then we call that census tract a high poverty neighborhood. So we then aggregated these neighborhoods up to the county, and we said that if 30% or more of the kids are in a high poverty neighborhood, then we call that entire county a high poverty area. So what we do on the first slide, the left slide, which is gray, we ask the question, how many white kids? And the idea is that, okay, so if you're a kid and you're born into this world, this is kind of this idea, this very basic idea of social structure, and you look at your reference group, which could be defined in racial terms. So white kids, think of other white kids as a reference group, black kids, other black kids, and so on and so forth. If your reference group is in poverty, that has real material consequences for you in terms of very likely the quality of your education, the crime rate, the residential quality of the neighborhood, the taxes that are paid, the level of health, and life expectancy also is related to that. So it's a very fundamental kind of measure, we feel. So if you look at this left map of the country, you see it's almost all gray. That is, most of the white kids, they're not in high poverty areas. There's just the one exception is this area around Albuquerque, a couple dots in Texas. There's a couple dots, and also there's a little bit of a concentration in Appalachia, which reflects the earlier slide that we looked at, that there is white poverty in Appalachia that's been there for a long time. But for the most part, white children did not grow up in high poverty areas. If we move to the next one where we ask the question about black children, we see that most of the country is either black or white. White means that there's less than 100 kids in the county. So there's not enough kids to really compute a measure for. So in the middle of the country where it's all white, there's very few African American or black kids in those areas. And where there are African American kids, very little of the map is shaded gray. Most of it is black, and you see that across the rural Northeast area that this organization is related to. In New York and Maine and these places, there are a lot of areas where African American kids are growing up in high poverty counties. It's also true of much of the South and Florida and California. Turning to the Hispanic, the bottom map on the right-hand side, we see it's kind of a more scattered pattern for Hispanics, where there kind of are Hispanics living everywhere, especially where there's farm workers and agricultural production. We see Hispanic children growing up in high poverty areas. So again, this is a really, really different thing, that race is related to class in the United States, and there are historical reasons for this, and it kind of is presenting children with a certain reality in terms of their reference group, the group that they're born, the neighborhood that they grow up in, that they're born into. So again, this is talking about this diversity of experiences that people have, that social class is related. It's not the same thing as race, but it's related to race and ethnicity. Hispanic, of course, is a very general category. 60% of Hispanics are Mexican origin, but you also have Caribbean people and other kinds of, South America as well. So it's a diverse group, primarily Mexican. Okay, so I guess that's the part on diversity, that one rural place is not the same as another. We know that there are white kids living in poverty, but it's very, very different from it's a very, very different rate of poverty than we see in Hispanics and blacks. So I guess, should we pause for a second for questions, or should I move on to the part about symbolic differences or symbolic boundaries?
Yeah, I think we can actually continue on for the moment.
Okay, so we'll continue on and see if, people should stop me if something comes up. I'm just focusing on the presentation. I'm not able to listen to the chat room that effectively while I'm talking. So now we want to talk about, given all this very, very, one of the things that my colleagues talk about in social science is that what's really unique about the United States is that it's a very unequal society. We have some children who are in the upper realms of, the upper 10% of children have probably more resources than any other children on the planet in terms of the material resources at their disposal through their family income and the things their family has. We have other children that are actually at the bottom compared to other countries in Europe and Japan and Australia that have fewer resources than any of the children in those other cultures. So we have it's actually a difficult problem, I think, to have a school in this country. So how do we make a difference in the lives of our students? And of course, we have to think about their families, because students come from families. Now, I think this idea that how do we understand this? That this is not something the material inequality in our culture is something that's very noticeable, and people have everybody, I think, has middle-class expectations, whether you're rich or poor. You expect to do well, you want to do well, you hope to do well at some level. You may deny that to yourself. You may be down on your luck or something. But I think we do hope to do well, we expect to do well, and we create symbolic boundaries. Even if we're not doing well at the moment, we create these symbolic boundaries with some kind of hierarchy of social worth in the background to present ourselves as in the most positive light that we can. So these boundaries allow individuals and families to positively portray their own self-worth in the context of social inequality. Now, this last bullet I think is important, that how this is done is it's not the same everywhere. There are differences in places, and I've been doing research on rural communities for 30-some years now, and I've really noticed this very, very strongly. You go to one place, you get a very different kind of symbolism than you get in other places. And I want to give you two examples of this. Well, here I guess we have, before I get to the examples, we're going to do a poll. So why don't we go ahead to this poll. And I'm asking you, the idea of a symbolic boundary, and let me just give you an example of this. I was doing a focus group with a bunch of people who were low income once, and a woman was talking about how she was in a neighborhood in a trailer park where most of the people were low income. And she was explained that she was in that trailer park and she had been down on her luck for a while because her husband fell off a roof while he was working and was unable to work. So she became poor and she became dependent on food stamps and other things, and they had children, so it was a difficult time. However, most of the other people in her trailer park were basically lazy and were unwilling to go to work, and they would sit on their couch and watch TV and not take the proper initiative. So she was saying symbolically that my own I live in this neighborhood with a bunch of poor people. My poverty is justified because of fate. However, the people around me, they're in a different category. There's a symbolic, they're on the other side of the boundary. So I think so she was saying, I feel bad about myself right now, but I actually, my situation is actually not because of me. I'm a good person. I have a lot of self-worth, and these other people are not. So that's kind of an example of what a symbolic boundary is. And so these questions are about, have you noticed in your district I see people are filling it out. So people are less willing to share information with others. So if you're eligible for free lunch, you may want to conceal that as far as possible, at least maybe not for the young kids, but certainly for the teenagers who become very aware of these class issues. The second one is motor vehicles. People want to show that they have money by driving a nice car, by clothing, by where they live. That's a big thing in many areas. If you live in the wrong part of town or if you live in the wrong part of the county, there's maybe a little bit of a stigma attached to that. Parents' education level, that's something that's a symbol of social class. And finally, racial identity could be related to this in some way, although it's not. Racial identity is not the same thing as social class. There's a lot of cultural things and there's history related to that, but it can relate to that because of, again, the history of the U.S. And then people can fill out other things. So I guess there's a lot, but the main thing, it seems to be coming around school lunch, that people notice these symbolic boundaries. Okay.
Tom, I think it's interesting if you look in the chat window, there are actually a number of the responses that are relating to technology, cell phones, computers, TVs, and things like that. Interestingly enough, I was pointed out that there was an NPR story talking about poverty today, actually, and talking about technology. Have you heard in your interviews and seen this type of symbolic boundary increasing?
That's interesting. I wouldn't know how to measure whether that's increasing. I think that's what I know is that social class boundaries are becoming further removed from each other. The extent to which the symbolic boundaries, I would expect that to be the case, but I wouldn't really know how to know that. I know that people feel like, kids now feel like they have to have smartphones, which to me, my God, I can't even bring myself to buy one of those things. I work on computers all day, so maybe it's not such a big deal for me, but to pay, $30 or $40 a month for a data charge for a stupid phone, but all kids have to have those things. So I think in that sense, I think the technology, the sort of the consumer technologies that people have available to them, probably those things are becoming necessary to have a certain kind of status in the school. I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case. Okay, so I think it looks like a lot of this is coming around school lunch. The second category is neighborhood of residence, which to me, that's really something that I know is true in my community in Ithaca, that the people are very proud of where they live if they live in certain neighborhoods, and they maybe don't want to go to other neighborhoods, even though Ithaca, to me, is kind of a small town where the neighborhoods are pretty much all the same. To me, it's very, very symbolic that I see people responding to that. Okay, so I think people are probably getting this. It looks like, so why don't we move on to the next slide. Okay, where are we here? People use symbolic bound. Where are we? Oh yes. Okay. Here are my two communities. I'm working on a paper. I've already written a paper, and I'm preparing it for publication on a place in Hamilton County, New York, which is a very interesting place. It's a county with very few residents. It's less than 5,000 residents in upstate New York. It's in the Adirondack region. The county land area is the size of Delaware, so it's very thinly populated. It also has very severe winters, so people have developed neighborliness in a way that they sort of look after each other so that to survive the winter. So if someone doesn't come out of their house at the usual time in the morning to go to work, they'll actually phone in to make sure the person is okay. So there's a very strong sense of community there. And one of the things that's happened over the years is that the community food pantry has been getting more and more use over time. And in the last year for which we have data, which is about 2010, we noticed that the 3,000 uses, or 3,000 discrete uses, not necessarily 3,000 people, but 3,000 different times people walked into that food pantry in a community of less than 5,000. So we wanted to know why was that. And what we found is that people were using the food pantry as a means of social security for the entire community. And when we started talking to people, we realized that nobody in the community wanted, even though some people definitely, when we did a survey, they said, well, I'm having a hard time, paying for my medical bills. I'm having a hard time, getting all the food I need from my family. They indicated that there were some hardships in the family, but nobody would admit to being poor because the community had a very strong sense of identity versus the rest of the world. The rest of the world presented itself to them as tourists who come to the Adirondacks. This is a region, the Indian Lake region, which is basically dependent on tourism. The boundary was drawn between the community as a whole and then the tourists who seemed to have a lot more money than the people that lived there, who seemed to be much more affluent and had nicer cars and, more expensive ability to buy things in the communities where they were having their vacations. So there's a very strong sense that we're kind of the local tough surviving locals, and there's a boundary between us and the tourists, the wealthy tourists. So that's very different than this place in central Wisconsin where I did a study where there was a very strong sense of people who are using welfare are somehow not as morally worthy as the rest of the community. So there was a symbolic boundary drawn between welfare users and people that didn't use welfare. And in fact, there was kind of one focus of this where there was a tavern in Wisconsin. In Wisconsin, you sort of take your family to the tavern a lot. It's kind of a center of the community, this North European, alcohol consuming thing. People would actually sit in a tavern, which is right across from the welfare office, and talk about who's coming in and out, and we observed that. We went into the tavern ourselves and kind of observed that behavior. And it was very much kind of a symbolic boundary that was drawn within the community between people that were using welfare and people that weren't. And these people were somehow, we could say generally they were considered lazy and dishonest in some way for getting welfare. So that kind of thing. So these are very different places where people would not say that same thing about people that were in need in Hamilton County. They would say this in central Wisconsin. So very, very different kinds of cultures out of which symbolic boundaries were created. Now here are some helpful attitudes, I think. Again, figuring out what's specific about your place. How do people understand symbolic boundaries? Is it around neighborhoods, cars? These are maybe some common things. Who gets school lunch? Who doesn't get school lunch? Here are some things some attitudes that I think are important for me. This is my own opinion, so I haven't tested this stuff out. I could say these are things that work for me. I mean, that's what I can say. I can't say this is research-based in a formal sense. These are the way that I do my work. First of all, this idea that human beings, we really are tremendously marvelous things. And let me put this in a way that I hope this is clear, but in the most extreme way that I can put it. There's a very, in some ways, depressing but also enlightening report that came out today on climate change in the U.S., which shows that we have a very serious problem, right? Climate change, that our whole ecosystem is changing. We're going to have a lot of problems if we're not able to address it properly. Now, the fact is that humans are the main source of climate change, of the degradation in our environment. The fact is that this is a statement about how powerful we humans are. our culture is very focused on getting as much money as possible, and I think that goal is what's really driving us towards, the goal of profitability and maximizing our wealth is really, I think, what's really driving a lot of the climate change. We can find a way to change that eventually, but I think we have to understand that we've had a very powerful impact on this entire planet, on the weather of this planet, on the climate of this planet. That's a really impressive thing. Now, we have the ability to solve that problem. We haven't done it yet, but I think hopefully someday soon we will. And I think we need to really respect ourselves as tremendous problem solvers. We've solved a lot. We've survived for 250,000 years as a species. It's a pretty impressive thing. A lot of other things that came out of Africa did not survive, right? So this is an impressive. Homo sapiens are impressive. That's number one. Second one, that Americans specifically, this is something I guess I could say is research tested. We're an optimistic people, and we especially want to feel optimistic about our children. So the idea of stigmatizing someone is really at odds with that kind of thing, that we need to treat children as a symbolic hope for the future, that maybe the children won't have a better life, but the parents are hoping for that, and respecting that optimism and cultivating it and trying to create the conditions for it to flower, so there can actually be a better future for the children. That's what we do. We do as educators, right? Of really believing in this stuff, even though some of it may be on faith. I think believing is important. And finally, I think that we clearly, we're destroying food every day. We have the ability. We have 1 in 4 children in this country are in a food insecure. There's very clear data about food insecurity, right? We have a lot of food insecurity. A lot of children have the highest rate of food insecurity, but we're destroying food every day. We can solve this problem, and it will be solved. Poverty and food insecurity and all these things will be solved by a potent combination of technology and social change. We're not there yet. It takes forever. It may take forever to get there in terms of my patience. I mean, I want to solve this problem today, but I believe that we will solve it. And I think that kind of having, again, confidence and optimism about our ability as human beings, we're very impressive specimens, very impressive species. Okay, so these are helpful attitudes, and I think this will go a long way. I mean, awareness of symbolic boundaries, the history of the symbolic boundaries, how this is different between the Northwoods and then this. I mean, this is kind of an industrial rural town in Wisconsin, central Wisconsin, where we observe this behavior. This is very typical of things that I see in New York. Both of those communities are in New York. And here are some references. I guess we're kind of out of time now, I guess, but this is the book that I just finished. And then Michelle Lamont's book on symbolic boundaries. That's also worth checking out. So should we just go there, or what should we do now, Pam?
What I'm going to do, there are a couple of questions here about students being prepared for jobs that don't exist in their communities. And I'd like to get to those, but I think we'll get to those questions after we have an opportunity for our discussants to present the strategies that they have in place in their schools, and then we'll come back to that. So I appreciate all the points you made, and we'll come back to some of those as well as some additional questions after this next section. With that, I just want to kind of get a sense from folks about what the free and reduced lunch eligibility rate is in the community or in the setting that you're working in. So if you're working in a school system or district or school, just to give us a sense of where you work, and specifically as it's measured by this particular measure. It's looking like we have around 40, 38, 39, 40% of you are over 60%, and about the same number in 46 to 60% free and reduced lunch rate. As Tom pointed out, free and reduced lunch rate is a good proxy for students living in poverty in the early grades, but less so in middle and high school. I want to just have that be a thought and context when we when we look at the next, we have the next 3 presentations around strategies being used in these particular districts. So I'm going to transition to the next slide at this point. I'm going to introduce Heather Perry. Although Heather is not able to join us, she's a superintendent in a school in Maine, the Maine Regional School Unit Number 3, which is located in rural Waldo County, Maine. Heather is the president of the Maine Small Schools Coalition and currently sits on as president of the Kennebec Valley Superintendents Association. She has, as with many rural superintendents, is very connected to her school and community and has had an emergency in her district, so I'm going to present her slides. Heather actually works in one of the 3 largest school districts, not in terms of the number of students, but rather the area in which her district covers. In the context for this particular district, many families within the district do not own a vehicle. They combine lack of transportation with the rural geography, and it's very limiting for families in this area in terms of being able to provide school services that are beyond the school day. Many have this lack of access, which do not allow them to have their students participate in band, chorus, volunteer coming into the school, attending IEPs, and so on. Just to give a little bit more of a context to the district itself, this particular school district serves 11 rural towns, with 1,400 students over 440 square miles. In her district, 72% of the children are eligible for free and reduced lunch, and about 15.4% don't have high school credentials. Unemployment rate in this county is about 11.3%, and the average weekly wage is around $654 per week, which does relate to one of the questions about the lack of access to professional jobs in some of the rural communities. The mean income is around $27,000. There's no public transportation beyond the school busing that's available there. And it's over 22 minutes of travel time to work in that area. So to give you a sense, it's very rural, very diverse, distributed over a large area. And this issue that's come up in the chat a little bit about cell phones and technology, in this particular area, the internet access is available in the schools and communities, in the school and library, but phone coverage is spotty there in that particular area. So how has this particular district provided support to students and families living in poverty? They actually use technology and a variety of innovative ways to help support the work. They have one-to-one laptops in 6 through 8 grades, iPads and computer carts in their K through 5. They have a community county technology center program within their district. They have a student technology team to support the teachers and students within that particular district. They provide access to student grades and other resources electronically. They have written many grants. They've worked as a collaborative with other small schools to hire a grant writer to write grants to get access to many of these technologies. And these technology tools actually have provided a vehicle literally to those families and students that could not get there physically to access resources. And so some of the resources and programming that's being provided in this district, they have put together a podcast series for the Family Literacy Liaison Program. They've actually created episodes that range from literacy materials at home around particular behavioral issues, setting rules and limits. They have family literacy nights, both virtually and also physically. They have literacy walks as well. And this particular programming, you can get a lot more detail of that. Angela will provide a link in the chat. You can go there just to see one of the types of podcasts they provide. They do provide family liaisons to the actual families physically, but they also do it in the form of these podcasts. Another program that has been instituted in this particular community is called the SPICE program. It's a home-based program that sends adult education and early childhood instructors to the family homes. The delivery model alleviates two major barriers for families to participate: child care and transportation. When Heather gave this presentation to our core group, she also talked about the importance of providing child care when she was having events at her district locations as well to help support these schools and families. There is a link to this particular program as well. It serves children birth to age 8 as well as their 16 to 20-year-old parents. So it's a capacity building. I saw some earlier posts in the chat about how to start to provide resources to change some of the cultural aspects in multi-generational poverty. And in this particular district, they go to the homes and to the families through both electronic means as well as physical means, and they see programming as for the parents as well as for the children. And they do focus on early childhood strategies. One question that was posted with the registration was, how do we start to implement strategies early on in early child care? And this particular program, if you go to the link, you can find out many more details about that programming. Another really innovative strategy that's being implemented within the district is what they call a virtual learning center. They have created a virtual environment identical to the school environment. So one of the things that is known in this district and across other rural schools is that for many parents, the schoolhouse, the high school, the middle school was not a positive place for many of these students because of the types of discrimination that happened, as well as just the lack of success academically in some cases. Because of that, trying to get parents to come into the school community is very difficult. It's an emotional thing, and besides often having lack of access to transportation, they also have real fear and apprehension about going there. So they've created an identical environment for online with avatars that looks like the classrooms and so on, and they've created GED programming and also a lounge and other places that exist in the school for folks to hang out. What Heather has reported is that many families living in poverty actually go to the school lounge, virtual lounge, and hang out with other folks that have the same kinds of needs for certain services, and they talk virtually. And then when there is an event at the school, they actually feel comfortable being in the space that they have frequented in a virtual space. They actually provide access to different types of support programming. They put up on the virtual bulletin board things such as access to food pantry, WIC registration, different kinds of things that are in support of these particular folks. It is actually all available there. So if they want to get out a notice of a particular program, they post it on the virtual environment as well as other locations, physical locations as well. But it has been extremely successful, and you can go to the site that was hosted here to actually see what that environment looks like. Some points that Heather wanted to make here, you must have an infrastructure in place for this, with bandwidth and technology tools. Must have staff members who can operate this kind of environment. Capacity is an issue sometimes. There was a lot of upfront work creating this environment, but it has been very successful. It was the vision for this kind of space, recognizing the realities of transportation being extremely important barrier for folks. And so really highlighting this, important to keep the access in mind as you're providing strategies. Are there particular questions that folks have about this particular set of strategies? I do know that there are opportunities for universal design for learning formats embedded within some of these environments. I see that as a question. Any other questions here? I'm going to hand this over then to Lynn McCann, and Lynn McCann is the superintendent of Cobble School, Richmond-Dale Central School District in New York. Lynn is going to talk about what they've done within their district, and as she does her presentation, she will focus on some of the tangible kinds of strategies that she's used within her district. Lynn?
So thanks, Pam. I'll just start by telling you a little bit about our school district. We are actually a merged school district. We merged 20 years ago. We're a school district of about 1,800 students pre-K through 12th grade. We're close to 200 square miles. We consist of 15 towns over 3 counties. Outside of what some of you may be familiar with as the capital region of New York, outside of the capital. But it's amazing what 50 miles or 45 miles going west can do relative to the rural status of our school district. We have we tipped the scales on 50%, over 50% free and reduced students in our K-5 population. In our county, which is Schoharie County, our median income is about $35,000, and the median education level is just less than a 2-year degree. We're hovering around an 11% unemployment rate, and we really have very little tax base in our school district. So our struggles relate to the expansive area of our school system, many that have been identified in the chat room, parents who don't have access to transportation to get jobs that would be higher paying. We have no industry in our community. Essentially, if you work in our school system, you're probably working in a retail job. There are, school districts. We also have a SUNY system 2-year college that employs some folks. However, for many, there just aren't great job opportunities, and particularly for our students, they may be competing with their own parents if they're hoping to get an after-school or outside-of-school job. So I noticed one of the questions in the chat room was like, what are some specific strategies that we can utilize with classroom teachers? And one of the things that we wanted to share is that ASCD has created a kit that enables folks to provide for a full simulation of what it's like to live in poverty. So it can be done in a large scale or a small scale, and essentially every 15-minute block within the simulation represents a week in the life of a family in poverty. And the participants take on the persona of maybe a single mom with 4 children who is working 3 jobs to try to make ends meet, to a 2-parent household with an income of about $18,000 between them. They're all different types of family configurations or lack thereof. And during the simulation, all of the participants have to interact with social service agencies, with the everyday situations that come up when you are in poverty. I have to make a choice between my child is sick and getting to the doctor or paying for groceries this week. or I didn't make my rent, and now I'm getting kicked out of my apartment. I need to go back to social services to try to figure out how to get assistance for housing, any of the number of different things that could occur and do regularly for half of the students that come to our school system. This was particularly important in our school district because currently we have about 175 professional staff in our district, and only 50% of them live within the community. So clearly those who live in the community and work for our school system and our teachers are making above the median income, and they're not experiencing poverty in the community themselves, but they're certainly interacting with many of our students who do. And the result of enabling faculty and staff to go through this simulation is that they really started to think about homework policies. And does it make sense to give homework to students, whether they're 5 or 8 or 10 or 15, when they're now starting to understand that many of these kids don't have access to a place where they're going to be able to do homework. Some of these students are taking care of younger siblings because a parent is at work, and the last thing that's on their mind is homework. And that would be one simple example of perspective that was built as a result of that. Another thing that generated from that was the beginnings of a backpack program where faculty and staff throughout the district have been contributing to backpacks that go home with kids on the weekends to make sure that certain families that we know are really up against it have the opportunity to have a couple of meals during the week when the students aren't able to come to school and get breakfast and lunch programs from us. It's led to a great deal of conversation about our utilization of technology, because we do have pockets of our school district that also do not have internet access, and what are our expectations relative to alternative methods of delivery for those students. It's led to conversations about making school district resources available, and has started conversations between our school system. We are fortunate to have a county-based transportation system that is attempting to be responsive to needs that we're identifying, so that if we can open up our facilities, then those that don't have the access or the financial means to be able to purchase technology for their homes are able to come to our schools to be able to start to participate in the digital world that's occurring around them. The other thing is, interestingly, many of our students and most of their parents do have cell phones, and so one of the things that we've started to develop as a communication tool is next year, rather than sending home a print district calendar or trying to put calendars onto the website, we're developing a district app, and we're using communication devices, including Facebook, Twitter, instant messaging, texting, emailing, because many of the parents either can access that at work if they are working in places that have those sorts of situations, or because for however they're doing it, they have these cell phones, we're able to communicate in a different way. So that's one strategy that we've implemented recently to try to build perspective amongst our own personnel about the circumstances from which our students come, and it's contributing to the design of both instruction and extracurricular opportunities in our school district. We now have a progression of professional development days that involve topics that are looking through the lens of poverty when we think about the strategies that we're utilizing in our classroom. Some of the other strategies that we've been using of late is to write grants in consortium, because we're still relatively a small district in contrast to the districts that are around us, particularly in the capital region, and our experience of trying to go it alone on grant writing didn't bring a great deal of success for us. And so one of the things that we were able to accomplish in consortium this year is a virtual AP grant with 7 other school districts from the capital region, where we are both sending and receiving AP courses, and our students are starting to be able to experience online learning in a way that we weren't able to provide before. So students receive a laptop, and we receive Tandberg equipment, and now the students are able to access learning that, if they are college-bound, is preparing them well relative to their ability and their 21st century skills. Another example of a grant that we also wrote in consortium was to try to take advantage of the college that's located in our community, but for whom many might not be able to access, whether it's their own limitations or expectations on their ability to succeed, or financial circumstances that wouldn't allow them to do so, where in Smart Scholars, we're starting with cohorts in 9th grade and preparing them to be able to get college credits throughout their high school years, and they're spending a significant portion of their 11th and 12th grade years on the SUNY Cobleskill campus, and part of their day in the high school, if they choose to do so. We've actually had, in the out years of the grant, we've had students who actually are spending almost all of their time in their senior year taking courses at SUNY Cobleskill. And these are families that absolutely would be first-generation students that have the ability to go to college, much less to think about having credential to be able to go to the capital region and get a significant job in industries that we hear about in our community but haven't necessarily been participants in. So some of the current grant applications that we're working on are looking more to a community schools model. We have some academic slide, particularly for our students that are living in significant poverty, when we let them go at the end of June and we don't see them again until after Labor Day. And so what we're trying to incorporate is a community schools model that has a comprehensive summer school for all students within the district, not just those who are falling behind or at the secondary level who need to get additional remedial time to recover credits, to incorporate school break learning academies, again, to have students have the opportunity for supervised, more project-based or thematic-based learning, proactive activities during our school breaks. This year, our holiday break in December was 2 weeks long, and our faculty and staff were significantly concerned about sending kids home for 2 weeks and not being able to provide for them the things that we do during the regular school year. So comprehensive summer school, school break learning academies, a lunch program over the summer, because again, some of our families are just, the kids are not eating when they're not in school, and so we're trying to put together various funding sources, because we find in the government part of provision of lunch programs, there are some limitations, and so we're trying to roll all these things into grants that we're writing. We would like to incorporate a school-based health center with that. We've had some interest from a health provider that's in the region but not currently within our schools, and it's sort of been an on and again, off again proposition for them because of their ability to access grants. We're looking at family literacy instruction and converting after-school programming to extended day learning programs where we're able to continue the day with certified teachers and utilize data points that we have about students in an after-school realm. We currently partner with Cornell Cooperative Extension, and it is a dedicated staff of relatively young folks who engage students in interest areas. They have clubs and different activities that they do. There's a homework room that the students go to, but we would like to be able to extend with teachers who teach during the day learning opportunities and explore different modes of instruction, wrapping this all together. And we're sort of looking at the community schools model that comes out of Flint, Michigan, the National Center for Community Education, that has been in existence for decades. And it's interesting to me that we're coming back to this sort of one-stop shopping arena and trying to intrigue grant funders based on the fact that we're a rural school district with some significant poverty. Finance in New York State, for any of you, actually most of you are experiencing it in one way or another, whether you're in New York or not, has not been favorable, and our district has been probably disproportionately impacted. 5 years ago, we probably laid off about 10% of our teaching staff because of the situation that we were in, and it's impacting class size, the ability of people to take on both the reform agenda as well as be able to be creative and to provide the sorts of things that we're discussing here. So we're trying to leverage that in grant applications, looking to foundations and talking about involving school districts across our county. There are 6 school systems within our county that might be inviting 2 funders. We don't have after-school transportation 5 days a week. We actually gave up some things in our budget to provide 2 days a week transportation, but for many of our students, they can't participate in sports activities because on the days that we don't have transportation, there's nobody that's going to be able to get them home. We've embedded our arts programs within the schedule of the regular day so that more students can participate, and we've gone to some creative scheduling things within the day so that students that would like to be involved in clubs at least once a month can get together with other students within a shortened schedule, particularly at the secondary level, to engage students and have them more connected to school but not be disadvantaged because of their rural living situations. The other thing that we've really been focusing on in the past couple of years is community collaborations. Like many rural areas, we're seeing increased mental health issues, chemical dependence issues, not only with our students that come to us on a daily basis, but with their families. And while we do still have county-run mental health clinic and chemical dependence clinic, again, if you don't have a car or you don't have means to transportation to get to those clinics, you're likely not having those needs addressed. And so we're trying to collaborate with the Community Services Board to, once again, embed those services within our school district so that families and students who are in need of those services can access them right within school. That's sort of the upside and the downside of having a college in our community. It's exacerbating some of the issues that we see in that regard. We're also sitting at a table with a group that we call Focus that brings every human service agency that we have available in the county together for a single point of access into the system so that we're coordinated, we're not overlapping our efforts relative to students and their families, and some of those agencies are now coming into our schools, and we're getting much more efficient in mobilizing the resources that we do have available to us without sort of some of the territorialism that we've historically seen. It's kind of interesting for a community that doesn't have a great deal of resources available. Over history, we've been somewhat territorial and competitive between ourselves, and we've been really focusing on trying to break down those barriers and borders within our county and bring all of the school systems to the table and to reinforce to families there's no wrong door. You can go in a door and we all collaborate such that if you haven't come in the door of the service that you absolutely need, we'll get you to the right place. And we're seeing some increased consumers as a result of that. The last thing that I wanted to highlight for our school district is, so we have to look within ourselves to be creative about opportunities. And one of the questions I saw in the chat room was, can children in poverty have optimism? And in our school system, I'm very proud to say that the staff and faculty absolutely believe that we can help to instill that. And so some of the things that we've done around some of our special education students were grouped in regions that are called BOCES regions in New York. And at the 11th hour a couple of years ago, one of our special ed programs for some significantly disabled students was canceled, and the students were going to be coming back to our district, or we needed to find new placements for them. Often that means hour and a half bus rides for them, and we really didn't want to do that. So we looked within ourselves, and we decided to, first we created employment and training in the community that's very much like a career education internship program. And we went to the retail places that we have. We have a hotel, we have a grocery store, we have a label shopper store, we have Pizza Hut, and even the college, and asked if they would take some of our special education students. We dedicated a faculty member and a support staff member to do the initial training and to check in on them on a regular basis. all we were asking of the employers was to give them a chance to experience work within our community. And it's a program that has grown over time because we supervise it well, and our students are so reliable, dedicated, earnest in their desire to learn and be good employees. That branched out when the program was canceled up at BOCES to students where we created in our own school district businesses that our special education students run. So we have a bakery in the high school. During the wintertime, the students bake bread and sell it to faculty and staff members. We're coming into the spring season now, and they do car detailing and grow herbs that also are sold within the community. And the students run these businesses. So they are the managers, they are the employees, they are the evaluators, they do the ordering, they do the finances, and it's caught the attention of some businesses that are outside our area. If you're familiar with the Beekman Boys, we had so many students that wanted to participate or were needing to participate in a program. We didn't have enough equipment. The Beekman Boys came to visit, were so impressed with what the students were doing that they put it up on their website. Within 4 days, we had enough money donated to buy the equipment we needed, and then they hired one of our students. Last year, one of the students that was in the employment and training in the community program was able to interview for a position at the college, got a full-time job with benefits working in the grounds department, and it was because of the training within this program. So we've been looking to ourselves to try to be creative in presenting and creating opportunities for our students.
Thank you, Lynn. That was great. So there are a few questions here I want to pose. So you have made a lot of efforts within your faculty to really focus on these students and families. A question was posed about how do you provide, bring to light the opportunities and try to change some attitudes without sounding judgmental about the current conditions that the student or family is living in?
I think the real springboard for that was to do the poverty simulation, because once people understand, or at least start to experience, they don't necessarily understand it because they haven't lived it themselves, but once they start to recognize the layers upon layers of complexity that exist for our students in poverty, they become much more thoughtful in the manner in which they communicate, in the way in which they invite folks to get involved, because parental involvement, we've finally come to realize, doesn't have to mean a presence in school. And when we seek to find talents that people hold and then encourage them to utilize them in some way that will either help the school or help their child's education in school, and we've noticed it and invited them to contribute, we're getting a strong reaction to that, a stronger reaction to that. And so we're sort of breaking down that, well, you know, you folks are fine, you're making a whole bunch of money, and you're just talking down to me. We're really, because of that deeper understanding of the circumstances, we've worked really hard to not leave that impression and to find different ways to pull people in rather than just expecting they will come to us.
There have been a couple of questions about out-migration of students. Once you provide opportunities for students that they, in fact, leave and don't come back, or there are not necessarily very many opportunities within that rural setting. Have you seen that within your region?
Well, that's an interesting thing. We just participated in a Center for Economic Growth panel discussion where just outside of our community, probably within an hour's distance, our own version of Tech Valley is being developed. And for our students and many of our families, it seems unreachable. So we started a dialogue with some of the employers that were on this panel, suggesting that while they're indicating they're having trouble finding employees that aren't the students that go to four-year colleges, come out and can get relatively high-tech jobs or higher-level positions, they're trying to find the folks that might go to certificate programs or might go to a 2-year college. And we started the dialogue with the concept of articulation programs that they would underwrite to provide certification programs such as Cisco certification in high schools, with the concept that if students get these certifications, they would guarantee X number of years of employment if these industries are willing to underwrite. And so it would get us additional coursework. It would provide additional opportunities for students. For many of our students, if they could be gainfully employed within an hour of the community, they wouldn't leave the community. They would stay and likely commute. Our commuting patterns are about 38 miles average for people commuting to work positions. So to some degree, our top students who go to 4-year colleges often leave, and then the phenomena is that they come back when they want to have children or raise a family because the community is such that they want their children to experience it, and then they commute to work. So we see it as a double-edged sword. We talk to our graduates every year about those who are college-bound coming back and contributing to the economic revitalization of our community. And for some students, there are gainful employment opportunities, again, within a commutable distance, so that when we educate them well, we're encouraging them that it doesn't have to mean that they leave us as a result.
There are also a couple of questions here about funding, and you did mention that you have received some grant funding. Are there other funding models that you use to support your programs that you laid out there, Lynn?
Well, we also have invested in a grant writing service because we've gained much more on an annual basis than what we pay to have that service. So we identify our top priorities on an annual basis, and the grant writers do a great deal of searching to find potential matches in funders. So some things we go after ourselves, some things we're going after in consortium. And then sort of putting next to that, we need to keep revitalizing and funding professional development for our own faculty and staff. And so we have taken advantage of a number of opportunities that have come up. For example, the Gates Foundation put out some funds in our state to do what was called a demonstration grant, and we were paired with a school district on Long Island, which initially some of our teachers were like, they're nothing like us, why would we pair with a school district like that? But it has built the culture of understanding that we can learn from educators in a variety of different places, and it's enhanced our knowledge of the utilization of technology, such as a webinar today or GoToMeeting, where we can get together without having to get in our cars. So we've learned that some of the grants that we don't fully understand, when we apply for them, turn out to be great opportunities that either pair us with other districts. We did a demonstration grant through our state education department that has provided just resources from the department itself, tied with the largest union in our state, NYSET, and it's brought to us professional development opportunities that are encouraging the use of video for both building classroom practices as well as collaborative practices of teacher groups working together. Our BOCES often encourages us to pursue some grant opportunities that they find in consortium, and they're putting together interesting mixes of school districts. So we're a rural district. Oftentimes, lately, when we've been applying for grants, they'll take a rural district, a suburban district, and an urban district, or multiples of each of those three types, and we become inviting to funders because we can compare and contrast the results that we're seeing within those grants.
Thanks, Lynn. I'm going to now turn it over to Principal Rhonda Poliquin of New Suncook School and Maine School District. Rhonda?
Hi, Pam. Thanks. Are you moving the slides, Pam? Or can I? Thanks. So just to give you a little background on our school, we're a K-5 elementary school of approximately 200 students, drawing from about 4 to 5 surrounding towns. Some students have up to a 45-minute bus ride to get to our school. Our free and reduced rate is about 60% at this point, though we do feel that for a variety of reasons, either with difficulty filling out paperwork or people being reluctant to submit the paperwork, I think our rate probably is a little bit higher. One of the things that we have going for us, I think, is a staff mindset of being really alert to conditions of students living in poverty and really aware of trying not to create those boundaries that Tom Hirschl was speaking about. So we're not creating have and have-nots. And some of the really simple things we have thought about is, for instance, when you do school pictures, and those pictures come back, and some kids get those pictures and some kids don't. We've been able to work with the photo company to make sure that all kids get a picture of some sort, all kids get a class picture, so that as kids are sharing, there's not that feeling of, how come you didn't get them, how come I did? Several years ago, we have an alternative learning day here, and previously students could order a T-shirt that was designed by students, and kids could order different colors, but you had to order and pay for them. And we tried to be aware of providing shirts for all kids, but it really became, again, an issue of the kids that showed up on the day with the right shirts and kids that didn't. So now we're able to, the PTA buys a shirt for every student. The shirts all look the same. Whether you could afford them or not, everyone gets a free one, which is just a really nice way, I think, of equalizing the playing field. Another piece that we have really tried to incorporate in kind of those have and have not situations, many of our staff do lunch with students. We have one of our teachers does a fancy lunch with the same group every Friday. Again, just to give kids the opportunity to sit at a table with other people, to eat sort of in a fancy atmosphere with a tablecloth and flowers and music. And it just gives kids a different opportunity, perhaps in a different environment than what they may experience at home, if indeed they even have a table to sit at when they're eating dinner with their family, if that even happens, as people are working many different jobs. It's also an opportunity during those times to gather some information about where the lifestyles that students are leading and who might need some support, what families might be struggling, and how we can also support some of that. We do offer an after-school program every day at our elementary school, and initially we offered scholarships for students who were not able to participate, but this year our director was able to set it up as a co-op program, so we don't offer scholarships anymore. If parents or families would like to volunteer their time, and she's set up a certain 8 to 10 hours, and your child gets a session for free. But the really great thing about it, I think, is that she's been able to find a job for everyone who would like to do something. So if you're not able to come and do a session, if you don't have transportation to get here, she's been able to find a job for you to do. For instance, one person does the birthday cards, the mailings. So they don't have to leave their house, but they're able to contribute, and their child is able to attend at no cost. Part of that program has been really successful in increasing our parent involvement, and again, sort of blending people that may not necessarily normally mix together. They do family dinners once a month, and because it's at the pickup time that they would normally pick up their children, they can just stay for dinner, and often there's some kind of program, either a parent education program, or they've done activities where they've made holiday crafts and holiday gifts, where parents and families can work together. She's done a great job of pulling in dads who may be mechanics, and they had a session on asking questions about what could be wrong with my car. But it was a great way to get a wide variety of people together and from different economic backgrounds, so that everyone is able to contribute what they're able to contribute, much as Lynn was talking about, finding the talents that are in your community no matter their economic background. The after-school program also provides some homework support. So students that do have difficulty completing homework at home because there may not be a place to do it, or there may not be someone there to support them, they can do that homework support after school. Another big piece that we're continuing to work on, and I love to hear about Lynn's trying to coordinate all the social services and health-related services. We have been successful in getting some dental clinics here that are free to students. So if they are not able to get to the dentist because of transportation or just for a cleaning and for an exam, that can happen here at school. We do that twice a year. We also have partnered with several mental health agencies, so the counseling can happen here. Families don't need to travel far to connect with a counselor, or the child can receive counseling, I think, on a more regular basis than they would if parents had to travel to a clinic, may not have gas that week, may not have a car that's working that week. So I think our regularity of services has been better when we can offer it here at school. The last piece is around a backpack program, as Lynn spoke about. Here it was kind of neat to see how that developed. It was our school lunch lady that organized and began that program. She saw, in talking with kids every day and serving them lunch and breakfast, who really was in need and who sort of struggled over those weekend times. She was able to do some fundraising and got support from the PTA and some other grants so that she's able to run that program. Run that program for about 30 or 40 students each week. I think that sort of wraps up some really specific ways that we've been able to support students, and I think a lot of it, again, is a mindset, and really be on the lookout for that, and in really small and individual ways, supporting students. I was interested to hear and to think a little bit more about those generational situations and those situational poverty situations, and do we deal with them differently, and how that plays out for students, I think, would be another area for us to explore a bit more.
Great. We have some questions that came up during both, well, actually across the different presenters. So I'm going to pose these, and I will open this up to any one of the discussants or to Dr. Hirschl. So a question that came up here was, do badge programs have any utility in helping rural students get jobs or get the skills for jobs? I think I'll start with Lynn because that came up during your session. Do you have a response to that question? Do you use a badge program in your district, Lynn?
I'm not sure. I need a clarification on what we mean by badge program.
If we could have the person who posted that question just add a little detail. I do know something that is considered a badge program, and a lot of rural communities, if they're involved in 4-H or other types of outside of school organizations and activities, they can receive certifications on particular skills. I don't know if there are any of those in your community, Lynn, that those students bring those skills, to the notice of your teachers and your programs. So, for example, if students were to get a networking badge for computer networking, would that be something that somehow factors into your school credit or opportunities for kids to get into a particular program?
I would say we have not done that on a whole-scale basis. There are probably some individual examples of it, but we've not made that like a major initiative.
Yeah, I see in the chat we have a couple of folks talking about badges used for acknowledging learning of skills, also 4-H school-based programs. So yeah, that was the focus of that. Dr. Hirschl or Rhonda, do you have any response to that question? Is that being used in your district?
It's not.
No. Okay. All right. Another question that came up, how does your relationship with BOCES supplement the instructional program you're maintaining?
Okay, so for us, BOCES has been a huge support relative to a lot of the instructional changes that have come with the reform agenda. So we drew down a limited amount of Race to the Top funds, but we gave them all to BOCES. And what that has provided for us is embedded coaching within our district. We've been able to pair Race to the Top funding with some grant funds to provide a day-a-week literacy coach in our middle school and our high school. We have an ELA coach that is about once every 6 weeks in the elementary school. We utilize grant funds to have a data coach, an ELA coach, and a math coach on a monthly basis in our middle school, and about every other month in each of the other schools. So what BOCES does for us is they train in partnership with the state those coaches, and then we're able to purchase services from BOCES for the provision of the coaches. And then next to that, as the coaches identify trends and needs for professional development throughout the 23 districts that make up our BOCES, they'll offer full, half, sometimes multiple day professional development workshops that, because we're a Race to the Top district member, our folks are able to attend at either little or no charge. So they really have been an integral partner with us because they know our district really well from the presence of the coaches, and they become a networking device where sometimes we'll just partner with another district that they've said, you know what, you should call this district and pair up your teachers. And so they've helped us in that manner.
Great, thank you, Lynn. There's a question here. It says the question is for a person who mentioned extracurricular activities done midday to deal with lack of transportation issues. How did teacher contract issues feed into the model?
Okay, so the way that works is we have, in our contracts, our secondary teachers do 5 classes per day, and what we do is we shorten the classes, and then many of them are paid stipends for some of the extracurricular work that they do. So they're, in essence, still getting paid when their club meets during the day, and for students that aren't connected, we'll utilize staff that either isn't doing extracurricular work or will use paraprofessional staff to be with students in a variety of different places. That's when they can go to computer labs to catch up on homework. They may be able to catch up with teachers who don't have extracurricular activities during that time. We really have tried to, though, press for kids getting connected. And so there might be just interest-based groupings for students during that time, like some kids might come together and play chess for that period of time because it's a social connection sort of network. So it didn't become a contract issue because it's all within the regular school day. Those who are running the activities are getting paid anyway, and then we supplemented with others.
And I would add to that, one of the pieces that kind of along those lines with our co-op, that teachers are able to work with students after school that may be part of the after-school program, and then that time is donated to help other students attend the program free of cost. So it's not really part of a teaching contract. It's the teacher doing it on a volunteer basis, but it's a nice way of being able to provide a student who you may have in your classroom some extra support and be able to donate that time towards the program.
Great, thank you. There's a question here about what are some examples of the poverty-focused professional development for educators. Do you want to highlight a few of the details of that programming, Lynn?
So ASCD, we have a New York affiliate for that, kicked us off with the utilization of the simulation and the kit in order to be able to utilize, to have our teachers experience the simulation. And then they put next to that Beth Lindsay Templeton, who also has a current book on working with students in poverty, came to our area and did some presentations about research and then application of that research within classrooms. And for us, what it really has led to is now smaller group book studies within our own school district. I saw some mention of Jensen's work and Payne's work. Some of our own teachers are exploring what's out there and creating their own group to examine the work and then reflect upon how it impacts the teaching that they're doing in their classrooms right now. BOCES continues to support it as sort of a strand, and as they identify more resources, they'll provide one-day workshops et cetera. That's sort of the approach that we've taken.
There's a question for you here, Rhonda. Is transportation available for after-school activities via the co-op for students without a ride?
It's not, but I think when you're in a rural area and those community connections, if transportation were the issue, we have a connection with a local church that they purchased a van that's licensed and the driver's license to provide transportation, so we can give families that contact information, and they can it's not coming through the school, so we're not sort of under that legal obligation. They can make that connection with that person, and they just provide the transportation home for the child. And it's been utilized a few times. It's not utilized a great deal, but it is available. It's also nice, though it can be difficult if parents are sort of working. If they can, it's nice to have that contact with that parent, and I think that's how some of those relationships have been built to help build the co-op with the coordinator of the after-school program and the parent as they pick up their child. But we do really try and be sure that transportation is an issue for why a child may not be attending the after-school program.
Thank you. Now's an opportunity for you to ask questions of one another. So if Dr. Hirsch wants to ask any questions of the discussants, Dr. Hirschl, would you like to ask Lynn or Rhonda any questions specific to their presentation?
Yeah, I really appreciated you guys, your all the things that you're doing about poverty. Do you think the situation is getting worse or getting better in terms of, that's something that I think researchers are interested in. Do you think poverty is getting worse or getting less worse for the kids?
I would say in our area it's getting worse.
Okay.
As you said, there are fewer well-paying jobs. Again, we're sort of in that area of a tourist area where people have seasonal work. So they work at the ski areas in the winter, and there's some summer employment with tourists that are in Maine. So I see people working. Companies or service industries are not hiring people full-time, so benefits are not available. And it just, again, the cost of heating, the cost of other things have risen as jobs and paying of jobs has not.
Right.
So I think it's become worse.
Yeah. So that's a very challenging situation.
Mm-hmm.
In our community, I would say it's getting worse, but it's sort of for two different reasons. The economics of New York aren't really positive right now, but in addition, our community was significantly adversely impacted by the hurricanes and tropical storm Lee a couple years ago, and so the county overall has not recovered from that yet, and property values dropped incredibly. We lost, not in my own school district, but in two bordering school districts, lost a significant percentage of students because the families weren't able to come back. They didn't have insurance. They couldn't do repairs on their homes, that kind of thing. So it is getting worse where we are.
Right. So it seems like that would really be tough as leaders of your organizations. That makes it tough on you guys, right, to sort of be, swimming upstream all the time.
And I think it also is impacted in trying to just pass, not just for the students in poverty, but pass school budgets. Things are being cut constantly because the taxpayer base is less and less all the time, too.
Yeah.
There's a question here that I could pose to you, Dr. Hirschl, as well. What does your research suggest about outmigration from rural communities for college or professions that don't come back? I think Lynn talked about this very well in terms of preparing her students for returning, actually talking to pre-graduates about that issue. But have you seen that in your research?
Most certainly. I think that's very, very standard that a lot of the kids that are better off, that are more likely to be my student of mine, we just wrote a paper about this, that definitely the better off students whose families have more money, whose parents are better educated, are more likely to out-migrate at high school graduation. I mean, I like the way that, I think it was Lynn that answered that question that way about just because students, your children leave, but they don't ever really leave, right? They're still, their memories are still sort of there. And it is true that there also is return migration in a lot of cases. So I think if we think of migration as a system with like a sending area and a receiving area, and migration is a connection, as a signal between those two areas, the signal is always there, and there's always a chance for a return migration, and you do tend to get counters. Wherever you have a stream, you tend to have a counter stream. That's kind of like, the way demographers think about migration. So I think it's really good to think about, we want to maximize the opportunities for our students. At the same time, we shouldn't feel like we're losing something when they leave. In fact, you could think of it, when they leave, we're also gaining something, because maybe they're finding an opportunity and that will come back someday. It very possibly will come back to the community.
Thank you very much. And with that, any questions of the discussants to Dr. Hirschl before we close? We have about a minute left.
I know. It's going to probably a longer answer, but I was really intrigued by that idea of situational and generational poverty, and wonder if there are different strategies. I look at students that are in situational poverty situations, and there's a great deal of stress for a period of time on families in those situations, but that sense of optimism because they've experienced sort of economic stability for a while is really different than students that have lived in generational poverty situations where there is no experience of really being in a different situation that is life as they know it. So the stress may be less, but the demands and the way that their life evolves may be different. So I just wondered if there are different strategies, or if you have any other information, I guess, about dealing with those two types of poverty.
I think that's a really important question, and it would take me 3 hours to answer it completely. However, I think that we should really understand. This is partly related to ethnicity and the fact that some communities, they have resources that are non-economic that I think are really important, especially like African Americans or Latinos. And there's a lot of positive and negative things on both sides of the equation that we oftentimes are very unaware of. And so I think it's really good to try to be exploratory in your work in this area and not make assumptions about stereotypes. Mm-hmm. It certainly is tougher to be in a multi-generational family in Appalachia or in the Black Belt South or these places. These are tough places. At the same time, people have resilient strategies for dealing with that. So it's kind of like things work both ways at all times. It's never a simple relationship. Mm-hmm. So that's the only thing I can really say, given that we have a minute left.
Right. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for the question, Rhonda.
Thank you very much. And this has been a great webinar and only opens up the topic. But you will be receiving a follow-up email that lets you know that this has been recorded and you have access to these resources. If you continue to have questions and want to pose them to us, you can pose them to Ask Arel, and we can provide resources if they're available on the particular topic, or we will factor it into our alliance work within this Rural Alliance. So please take the time to fill out the stakeholder feedback survey. It's very instrumental in determining what we're going to do for the next one, and also as part of our reporting. So again, thank you all to the discussants as well as our presenters, and thank you very much for all of the participants.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thanks so much. This concludes our bridge event, and you'll receive an email from us in about 7 or 8 days with a link to the recording. Thank you.
Thank you.